Workaholism is often seen as this amazing badge of honor in today's society. Unfortunately, it's something that has serious consequences on a person's health, relationship, and overall well being. In this episode today, I am going to be sharing with you some of the things you need to know about workaholism. Welcome to Leading Intentionally, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of leadership transformation. I am Carmen Paredes, your guide in this journey, and I'm so thrilled to have you with us today. In each episode, we share strategies, insights, and stories to help you drive growth, enhance workplace culture, and lead with intentionality. Whether you are a seasoned executive, an aspired leader, or just someone passionate about positivity in the workplace, this podcast is for you. Each week, I'll bring you conversations with thought leaders, experts, and trailblazers that will share with you their insights, wisdom, and experiences so that you can apply these practical tips to your leadership journey. Get ready to explore topics like inclusive leadership, women's empowerment, effective communication, and so much more. If you're ready to lead intentionally and make lasting impact in your organization, you are in the right place. Let's embark in this transformative leadership journey together. This is Leading Intentionally. Let's dive in. I am so excited to talk about this topic today, workaholism, because unbeknownst to me, it was something that really resonated with the other speakers, the organizer, and the audience of my recent TEDx talk, which you're going to hear all about it as soon as it's available. I'm going to share with you. But I want to delve deeper into the concept of workaholism, the concept of work as an addiction, because I thought it was something that everyone knows. And it turns out that it's an idea that was worth sharing in the TEDx stage, but it's also an idea that I need to make sure I talk more about because it is definitely a problem that is impacting a lot of people. So let's start by defining what exactly is workaholism. And as the name suggests, workaholism is an addiction to work. An addiction is characterized by an obsessive need to do something. When we're talking about an addiction to alcohol or cigarettes or any drugs, this become a need because your system has changed chemically and is expecting the spike of dopamine that comes when you take these substances. So, as crazy as this might sound in the surface, when you are a workaholic, every complete presentation, every recognition that you get, every time you get your to do list accomplished, you get a rush of dopamine also. And this is what makes you addicted to it. So, people who struggle with workaholism may feel restless when they are not working. They may feel anxious when they are not producing something. They have attached their identity to what they do and not to who they are. Have you ever experienced when you are in a networking event or just meeting someone for the first time that all you can talk about yourself is what you do because you are associating, you are identifying so deeply and ingrained with the thing that you do and not who you are? One of the characteristics of being a workaholic is that there is actually no boundaries. There's no limitations or lines between your work life and your personal life. And in case you're wondering, yes, I am a recovered workaholic. And I remember one time being in a restaurant with my children. They were 10 and 8, or maybe 11 and 9. And they were asking me and their dad for their phones to actually play. At that time, they didn't have phones, they didn't have social media, they weren't used to that, but they wanted to have their phones and pretend they were working. And that was actually one of the early signs, which, by the way, I didn't pay attention, but I remember making the connection. It's like, wow, this is what they see. They see me working all the time. And then as they got older, a little more vocal, I would get remarks while we were in vacations like, well, I'm sure you can fit in some work as we are on the Disney World line to write, you know, fill in the blank. And I thought, that's cute. They know how my brain works. But really, think about what would it be if your addiction was something else than work? If it was drinking, if it was smoking, if it was, something else. Do you think it would be so socially accepted that you have this nonstop need to perform this thing, to try this thing that you're addicted to? No. And this is what workaholism is so dangerous, because it's socially accepted and it is forgiven by those around you, even though you're hurting them, because it's what we do. We grow up, we go to school, we go to work, and you work hard so you can be successful. And the harder you work and the more successful you become, the more praise you get. And it's unfortunate that there's no more people watching over these behaviors, because if you have a friend that tends to drink a little too much, I believe as a good friend, you would say, hey, maybe you should slow down. Maybe you shouldn't have that next drink. Maybe you shouldn't drink every day. But who has ever told you that about working too hard, about working 80 hours a week like I was doing? Nobody. In fact, the more I worked, the more work I got. The more I work, the more expected was for me. The more I worked, the more I had to work. So, with that in mind, I want to talk about some of the signs and symptoms of workaholism. So, when you should start getting worried about maybe I am a workaholic, maybe someone that I care about is a workaholic. Well, the first thing is working long, long hours, working all the time, finding excuses to work. For example, I can tell you in my life, um, as I said, I was working 80 hours a week. I would definitely work between the 8 to 5, but I would work as I was making my coffee. I would work as I was driving. I would work after the kids went to bed. I would work on weekends. I would work on vacations. I would work any available time I had. Because of that, the second symptom is you neglect personal relationships. And this is something I actually have talked about in both my books. In this book, I talk about my relationship with my son, and in this book, I talk about my relationship with my daughter and how I had to mend and heal those relationships after I woke up of this workaholism. And obviously, it also affected my romantic relationships. Then, the unexpected symptom it's that affects the relationship with yourself. Because when you're not working, you feel guilty for not working. And when you feel guilty about anything, you are not exuding self love and self compassion. And so you start thinking that you're not good enough because you don't have the energy, perhaps, or because you are not working as hard as your subconscious is telling you that you have to work. And then it becomes this vicious cycle. And what makes workaholism really an addiction is that when you are a workaholic, you're using work to numb pain. You're using work to distract yourself from things that are happening in your life personally, mentally, emotionally. We you use work to numb relationships. Just the way an alcoholic uses alcohol, a smoker uses cigarettes, a drug addict might use cocaine or whatever other drug they use. You, if you are a workaholic, you're using work to avoid dealing with what's happening in your life. But what causes workaholism? And this is something that I believe is where my experience have allowed me to dive deep and help others overcome this phenomenon. And I discovered this in trying to heal myself. And I have correlated workaholism with trauma. And it's really when you have something that you're trying to protect within your core personality, that things like addictions come into play. For instance, I use the Enneagram to help people understand what their core wounds are. And core wounds are things like assuming that any feedback is criticism because you were put down by an authority figure in your life and you feel like you disappointed them and you never want to do that again. So you might work extra hard to avoid any potential type of criticism. That's what happens with Enneagrams 1, for example. And we can go into all the Enneagram types, but I'll save that for my keynotes. But basically, what happened is your core wound is screaming out loud, saying, please protect me from this thing that it hurts, from this thing that's painful. And again, because it's socially acceptable, workaholism comes to the rescue. And believe it or not, workaholism will take a toll on your overall well being and your health. Because I have never met a workaholic that doesn't burn out. And why is this? Is because the dose of work needs to gradually increase so you can feel the same effect, the same rush, just like a drug. Like the same way you don't see an alcoholic that eventually doesn't get into trouble or lose their families or lose their job or have to go to rehab. Same with drug addicts, smokers, people get cancer and all these things. Workaholism takes a toll in your health and your well being because you will end up isolated and burn out. The exhaustion that you will feel when you burn out is not anything you can comprehend unless you've been there. It is a combination of physically, emotional, and mentally exhaustion. And it becomes a storm that affects every area of your life. And usually, by the time you realize you're in the middle of the storm, it's too late to try to escape it. And this is where a lot of people really go downhill with this. And like any addiction, it could end up in a very, very bad place if you don't discover it on time. So, some strategies for overcoming workaholism, especially if you can catch it in the earliest stages, are setting boundaries, making a clear distinction between your personal life and your work. Now, when you work from home, like most people do after the pandemic, this becomes increasingly more difficult. You really have to have the discipline to implement strategies to help you put a parameter between work hours and personal hours. And trust me, I understand that some professions, some levels of responsibility, some titles require more than 8 hours a day work. But are you obsessively trying to find work that is not urgent, might be important, but it's not urgent, that can wait for you tomorrow? Some clear strategies to be able to do that is to identify what's urgent versus what's important, and what things need to be done by yourself and what things you need to delegate. And this is when exceptional leadership comes into the play, because leaders know that by delegating things to their teams, they are not only empowering them, allowing them to grow professionally, but also supporting their career goals. By being authentic and say, I can do this, maybe because it's going to take me longer because I don't know exactly what I'm doing, or because I don't have the time or the stamina to do it, but I'm going to give it to someone in my team who may need the experience or is eager to do it. Then you're definitely tapping into the core principles of exceptional leadership. And besides, by doing that, you're exuding self compassion for yourself, which is the first characteristic. Now, obviously, this is not something that is easy to do for yourself. If not, everyone would do it. It's like the reason why alcoholics have to go through, you know, AA, or drug addicts need to go to rehab, because you're trying to break a pattern that you have very, very deep ingrained into your survival mechanism. And every time that something goes crazy, your fight or flight is going to activate and you're going to go back to normal. And this is where coaching, mentorship is a great asset and resource for yourself or anyone in your team to make sure that when you establish the new ways that will come with an assessment on how your own workaholism is rooted into your core wounds, and what are the things that you need to be watching, and what are the things you should be able to do to create that boundary between work and personal life in a healthy way. This is where coaching or consulting or mentoring will help you stick to those things. And so I want companies to listen very carefully what I'm going to say now, because this is a topic that goes well beyond to what employees should be responsible for. Sure, because it's a topic that will affect their personal life. Employees should care about this. But sometimes we are too deep into the addiction that we can't see that we are not being coherent, or we're doing something that is damaging our health. It's an addiction. And this is when leaders, peers, and colleagues can take ownership in helping those that are displaying signs of workaholism. And so I believe that organizations should have campaigns to help people understand what workaholism is, how to prevent it, and how to overcome it once you're a part of it. This can be first introduced to employees with a simple conference, brown bag lunch, a keynote, and of course, workshops when you want to go deep into the solutions. Many companies sponsor today, facilitate, or provide their employees with resources to overcome things like divorces, personal conflicts, and other addictions. So why not consider having into your Rolodex of resources for your employees something that will help them with burnout and workaholism? There's so much talk about work-life balance, and I honestly haven't seen a lot being done in my 20 plus years of experience. And this is why I have created this solution where I offer companies and individuals tools that they can use to mitigate the impact of this addiction into their employees. And guess what? You're going to love this part, because when you take care of your employees this way, productivity will increase. So, at first take, you might say, well, if they don't work as much, then how are they going to be more productive? How are they going to get their work done? But let me tell you something. Just like in school, you can be sitting in your computer for 16 hours, but that doesn't mean that you were productive 16 hours. So what if instead of working 60 hours, you actually work the 8, maybe not hours that you need to work, but you are focused and productive because you are not just sitting there trying to avoid the pain of other things in your life. And one of the reasons I'm speaking so loudly about this is because society encourages to be workaholics. Society encourages to be at the submission of this drug that pays you to be part of the club, that pays you to be part of the circle of addiction. And this is why I believe that leaders are the number one point of defense when it comes to encouraging your teams, your peers, and even your leaders to not fall into this trap. I remember one time, a long time ago, I had an employee who had a hysterectomy, and she was definitely a workaholic. So she had a surgery, and doctor prescribed that she would be off for 2 weeks. And I remember having a conversation with her, and I said, so and so, I'm not going to say the name, um, you've been put in short term disability, which means you're not allowed to respond to any emails and do any work. And for the record, I said, if I see you online, I am going to request the IT department to disconnect your access. And, you know, this may sound like something extreme, but I also knew that if I didn't do that, she was going to be working like she would normally, because that's who she was. And not only she wasn't going to get paid, but she wasn't going to be able to recover from her surgery in the way she needed to be. So what are you doing as a leader to prevent anyone in your team to suffer the consequences of this addiction. And FYI, so you are conscious about this. The fact that you are aware that other ones are being affected by workaholism doesn't mean that you are aware that you are. Because I, throughout my career, was fantastic, making sure my team took the vacations, making sure nobody lost time off, making sure people went and spent time without connectivity. But I wasn't doing that for myself. And unfortunately, I didn't have the leadership to point it out to me. So this is why I believe this needs to come from the top in the organization. So if you're any C level, CEO, COO, CFO, CMO, any person with a C level in their title, you have the power to bring this into your organization so you start cascading down to all levels of leadership. And your employees will not only will respond with more loyalty and dedication and commitment and passion with your organization, to your organization, but your productivity will increase. Your turnover will decrease because people are not going to be sick, burning out, and they are going to want to be more productive for you. So, what resources may individuals or companies use to see how big this problem is for them? Well, I have created a quiz on determining if you are a workaholic or not. And I would love to make that available to you. And I'll put the link somewhere here in the description of this episode. But I want you to take this as a grain of salt. Of course, I'm not a doctor. This is not diagnosing any mental illness or anything like that. So let's put all those disclosures here. But I am someone who was a workaholic and has recovered from it. I am someone who have helped hundreds of leaders deal with burnout, and I have seen the patterns of how this happened and why it happens. And it all comes down to a core wound, to a trauma that you're trying to cover up like a pig with a lipstick. It continues to be a pig. The trauma continues to be there. And if it's no work, it's going to be alcohol or it's going to be any other type of addictions I don't want to mention here. But definitely, what is going to happen is that your subconscious is going to find ways to take your attention away from those things that are painful. And because work is so socially accepted and encouraged, it's so easy to fall into this trap. Thank you for joining me in today's episode of Living Intentional. I want you to remember how important it is to prioritize your health, your well being, so you can actually achieve a balanced, successful life. And until next time, don't forget to live intentionally.